Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Grant Lenahan from Appledore Research Group, and the first thing I want to do is thank CSG for making this afternoon possible, for bringing us together, for getting the room, for shaping the direction of this talk. And I also want to thank all of the speakers and panelists who have given their time this afternoon to make this possible, and we'll be introducing them one-on-one as we go through. And I'd like to invite the panel up for the first panel and introduce some of the guests. I'll let the three panelists take their seats. And the first person that we have with us, not in order, is Dan Thygesen, who is Senior VP for T-Mobile with partner programs and developing their partner business. The second person that we have is Amery, the VP for Partner Services at TELUS. So we've got two operators broadening their focus into the partner area to get into different vertical industries, and that's going to be, I think, a big theme today. And finally, we have Chad Dunavant from CSG, representing CSG and representing some of the technology implementations that we have here. So a round of thanks for these folks for joining us. And I said earlier that we really want to think differently this afternoon and not say, hey, how do we support the same services that we've had for the past 20 years 10% more efficiently, or even like the video just said, 15% more efficiently. But how do we get into new revenues that we haven't had at all? And what kind of changes do we need to get there? So I'd like to maybe kick it off with, where do we see the real market opportunities? Not the ones we wish we had, but the ones that we're actually seeing. And just to give a little background, my firm has actually quantified over 100 billion in incremental revenues that we see, and that's not even counting some of the stuff that I know we've talked about earlier today. Chad, would you like to start there and get the panel going?
I mean, from an operator perspective, maybe we lead with them about kind of the businesses that they're uncovering, and I'd love to maybe highlight some of the areas we're focused on to support them. If that's okay, Dan?
Yeah, sure. I'd invite everybody to think about it actually from, you have to set a course to get your mind and the ability to operate around incremental revenue opportunities and removing barriers and finding things that are problematic for your customers and removing those problems. And to set that course, to create that bearing, one of the things we've done at T-Mobile is we've created this mission where we want to always put a mission statement in front of us that says we need to be data informed, we want to be AI enabled, and we want to be a digital first company, which is, from a carrier perspective, it's changing the way telcos tend to think about being a business. Like we actually want to move from being a telco more into being a techco, because those are ultimately the things that are going to enable some of these, these unlocks, these opportunities to think differently about how you remove the barriers and think differently about how you stop people from leaving your network, right? Churn is a big problem on the carrier side. So that's at least how we tend to try to start to think about it, and then we can organize accordingly around that as a mission or as a mantra: data informed, AI enabled, digital first. To start to unlock these things. This what I'm describing is actually how we think about it as a term we use called the uncarrier. You probably hear about that, or you see that in marketing these days, and it's been very, very successful for us as an enterprise in removing these barriers and unlocking these problems that customers have. And the interesting thing is you're using this as a way to get closer to your customers, and the closer you get to them, the more opportunities you start to recognize of incremental accretive things that you can offer them in exchange for that relationship or that revenue or that tenure, right? And so that's how we tend to think about things, I think.
Dan, you mentioned the word agility, and I think one of the things that we've seen as we've talked with operators around the world is leaning on the systems that have been in place for maybe your residential systems or even some of your enterprise systems for 20, 30 years, they're not prepared to meet the demands of the business today. So, we've been really focused on identifying those kind of use cases, whether it's on the enterprise side or on the residential side, and helping operators really accelerate the time to market around those. I think we've all experienced a situation where a great business idea ends up in the operations teams, and you're just waiting for things to get configured or delivered to the market. And how do we make that easier for folks? How do we give them advanced tools? How do we allow the network, which is now defined by software, to be defined by software? And I think, again, some of this thinking that we've had in this industry is we have to transform all of it at the start. And I think we can start to pick off use cases in enterprise, in wholesale, on the edge, that allow us to accelerate those new services without having to transform the whole thing. And I think that's a big opportunity that I see as you talk through agility.
Cal, did you want to pick up on that at all?
Yeah, well, personally, I love the commercial because now I got a whole bunch of ideas in my head. But if you think about it, think about it from this perspective. The service that we provide is extremely valuable. And just look at what you're carrying in your pocket right now. I got a message earlier, family member, bit of an issue. Managed the issue remotely in 5 minutes. Before, in a world, because I'm old, in a world before, I would have had to leave here, go somewhere, manage it, and so on and so forth. So we're at a point of inflection in how to drive real recognition of the value that we create instead of every network's the same. Because every network's not the same, but it's as illustrated by the brand. And I have to say, I've been 30 years in telecom, and when you guys launched the Uncarrier, I thought, wow, literally, finally resonating with people who really don't like to deal with the telephone companies. And even relatively new mobile operators only still have been painted with that brush of difficult to deal with, singularly myopic, delivered their way, not illustrative of what customers care about. And cracking the code on that is critical, removing the tension of the customer interaction point, digital transformation, seamless integration so that you can buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 services from me and know that you're going to get a correct bill in a timely manner, and you're going to feel, wow, I got a good deal. So a lot to unpack, which is the challenges that we're facing at the strategic level as we sit around the table trying to, monetize the massive investment in the network infrastructure. And it's the juxtapositions of the investment with the value creation and the recognition of the brand differentiation as illustrated by customers wanting to stay with us.
100%.
Cal, one of the things, you said, hey, I remember when things were a lot older, a lot harder because I'm old, and I'm going to remember something that I think is really pertinent to your point because I'm old. I can't remember which carrier it was, but in the fairly early days of mobile in the UK, Virgin Mobile was an MVNO, and they were an MVNO on one of the big legacy carriers. And all of the customer satisfaction in terms of how good is the service you're receiving for that carrier and T-Mobile showed that people thought the service was better, not T-Mobile, on Virgin Mobile than on the underlying carrier. It was the same network, right? But one apparently made problems easier to get by and gave you answers more quickly. So, perception is reality, as they say, but I also think this could be really important if we believe that 5G, for example, we keep hearing 5G is going to allow very demanding use cases. Doesn't demanding use cases mean demanding customers? And do any of you guys want to speak on that at all?
I mean, I think the MVNO phenomenon is a really interesting one because we're kind of seeing the pendulum come back around where MVNOs are popping up everywhere, and they're able to take advantage of some of these things because they're starting from really greenfield. Like they're getting the network components of it from the traditional operator, but they're able to invent themselves in a new stack and do things just differently and more quickly. And I think it's a lesson that the industry can take as they look to roll out, maybe enterprise services or they roll out edge services in a different way. Is is to think almost more like an MVNO. Like, do we have to do it within the four walls that we've always operated, or can we do it as an adjunct service that lives outside of those walls? And maybe they come back together at some point, but at least to start, it's a lot less capital intensive.
I totally agree. By the way, you mentioned agility, because we touched on it in a few different areas. One of the primary sort of impediments to being agile is the fact that most of the carriers, in fact, a lot of technology these days, has this massive vault of technical debt that's been built over time. You also said configurable. If things could be configured very quickly on the network, the world would be a much different place. It'd be way ahead of where we are now. Unfortunately, this technical debt that we tend to build over time doesn't allow that configurability. We have to go repurpose an entire stack or redefine the technology that creates the utility that leads to the value, because it's not something you can just flip a switch. It was never designed that way. Nobody thought about it that way, per se. Software as a service gets you much, much closer to that. But, like these networks that we sort of live in, and to Cal's point, like these are very important things. They're integrated into our lives. Unfortunately, they're built on pretty old technology. And even when we're deploying 5G, the way we operate as an enterprise, it's fairly old school, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. Is you're talking about changing technology or changing infrastructure or changing the integration points. What really needs to happen is people need to change how they view the universe. Like, it's literally transformation of a rather narrow-minded oligopoly or monopoly in a worst case kind of mentality. I've been doing this in a Canadian context, in a U.S. context, in a global context, and it is amazing how similar the CSPs, carrier services brains, are wired. They are literally wired down a path of a divine right to provide the service and ownership of. And it's that thinking that needs to change, not just the tools. The tools will enable. And you're absolutely right. The stacks that we deal with are legacy. I love that legacy investment debt that we have to try to figure out. The networks are unbelievable. And what they're capable of is awesome. Our ability to leverage it to transform people's lives is illustrative of our reality today, but we still haven't changed our mindset and how we approach it. And it's that which, as a group, because we're not dumb people. We're very, very well educated, thoughtful individuals. Why do we make it hard for people to interact with us?
Well, you've all mentioned, I'm going to mention the elephant on the table that you've all been working your way around. An economist would say this technical debt is a sunk cost. And we all know that when we do a business plan in ROI, we put sunk costs aside, right? You don't throw good money after bad and actually do the numbers and say, does it make sense to change? Why aren't we doing that? What's blocking us? I've got a theory.
That concludes our show for today.
The sunk cost also is supported by a lot of revenue. So even, at the end of the day, there's that legacy infrastructure may be supporting literally hundreds of millions of subscribers and SIM cards and phones and devices. And so I think it's very daunting to say, okay, we're going to just shelve that sunk cost and move everything to and not disrupt the billions of dollars we collect every month. So
it's a risk.
It's risk and it's revenue.
I don't think there is any solution where you can just say, okay, there's the new thing. I'm going to build it, and I flip over and turn off the old thing. It's just not possible. So the cost is actually a little more complex when you think about the cost factor and the cost basis, because you literally have to go design your new co, whether it's servco, opco, netco, whatever that may be. You've got to design it. You've got to invest in it. You've got to stand it up. You've got to proof of concept, proof of value of the thing to make sure that it works. And while you're doing that and spending, you got to continue to run your business on this mountain of technical debt on the legacy stuff. And then, there's always some risk involved with migrating. And I don't mean from one carrier to another. I mean from one box to another. Like, you've got to move, we have north of 120 million customers at T-Mobile US. Like, can you imagine the risk that's associated with touching every one of those customers and lifting and shifting them over into a different box with a different set of configurables and a different potential experience. Like, those are all things that come with risk, and generally risk is associated with cost. So it's a very, very delicate balance. And
as revenue is slowly declining, but if you introduce more risk, does it decline faster? And then you can't support the investment in NewCo. So strategies have been presented around. There's concepts called cap and grow, which you cap the legacy stack, and as you introduce new services, you put them on the new stack, and that's great. But at some point, you cap to a point where no one else is moving. So now you got a legacy stack that's still supporting 60% of your business. And now, do you have to force migrate, or do you, because the cost now is outweighing the revenue you're getting from that new stack. Right. So you have to, the economics of the problem is real. And again, I think what I've seen work most recently is identifying those new services. We talked off stage a little bit about emergency services that are being deployed, and how do we think about the traditional operator moving from providing services to consumers to becoming a TechCo. What are TechCo services? Well, if I'm going to be providing emergency services to all these new places, what other services does the telecom bring to the table? Do they bring billing as a service for those operators that they can extend? Do they bring other partner management capabilities? Do they bring catalog capabilities? These are services that need to be explored because they accelerate the revenue on the other side of the equation. That makes the economics a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, I was going to say, there's actually a tie into what you said a little bit earlier about the wholesale market as well, and in particular MVNOs, because I completely agree. I'll say this with a little bit of risk, but it's probably safe to say that not all carriers can be all things to all people. I mean, you might want to delete that part from the tape later, but the MVNOs provide a very interesting perspective on driving innovation in the marketplace, because there are lots of people that don't necessarily need to buy an all-you-can-eat unlimited plan with Netflix and Hulu and Apple TV and all of these other incremental things. And that means that the country, and as a nation of users, is segmented into lots of different groups that are looking for different things. And the MVNOs do a really good job at focusing on how do I serve that niche in particular. What that does for us in terms of identifying innovation points is it also allows us to use wholesale relationships, MVNOs, IoT solution providers, third parties that bring an idea to the network and then execute on that value proposition to their own base of customers. It allows us to use those kinds of mechanics as a way to proof of concept things. And eventually, when you see big ideas that work well, when they're executed at small scale, then that makes a lot more people interested in it. And it sort of, I think, makes a lot of the bigger enterprise telco operators also want to grab onto that technology or want to try to take that value proposition, bring it in-house potentially, and find a way to use that as a big unlock to, again, creating these deeper relationships with their own customers, designing and building and leaning into accretive value, so more revenue, less churn. It's a really sort of nice back and forth. There's a lot of cool MVNOs out there. I say this because I'm pretty close to the MVNO business. It's my core function at T-Mobile. But they're all unique in a sense. There was a time 15 years ago when you had a bunch of MVNOs all trying to sell the same thing, the lowest price. That doesn't work. And now what you see in the wholesale markets are lots of interesting ideas on distribution, value propositions, how they bundle their services with an affinity program, so where you're not a customer, you're a member. Mm-hmm. You're a member of the club. Mm-hmm. And you start to see that as evidence that these innovative ideas start to create tons of value, and then everybody wants a little bit of value, right?
Yeah, and I think adding to that are the elements of new creation. So giving them access to our network infrastructure in a way that adds value for the customer, the MVNO, and the carrier, great. Our problem is we need to find new money relatively quickly. We really do. And there was a question about the why do we keep investing? Well, look at this: 2G, 3G, 4G, 4G plus, 5G, 5G standalone. I read an article the other day about 6G. We've barely scratched the surface. Most countries don't have standalone 5G deployed, and people are already trying to sell me 6G for my network. So there's not enough time to wring value out of the investment of the network topology in a way that's meaningful because, I hate this word and I apologize in advance, but the commoditization of our service is an absence of value in the perception of our customers. Well, let's reintroduce the value. The value is beyond the core connectivity. The value is, as a service, insert here what as a service might look like. Smart cities, better traffic management. Anybody live in a city with really, really bad gridlock? Or is it just me? So do I need to move? Right? Like, why is it? I was at an intersection the other day. So I'm stopped at a traffic, like major intersection, stoplight. It turns green. I advanced to, I can see the light for the next intersection. I just got there, it turned red. You would think that the machine could sync up in an AI universe. Cal, stop, and we're going to turn this one green, this one green, this one green, recognizing traffic and moving traffic more smartly. Fix the carbon footprint, eliminate the frustration and anxiety from people stuck in traffic. Like, the human cost of that infrastructure should not be made inconsequential. It's significant in everybody's life. And yet, even though we have the capability, we don't need advanced Gen AI tools in order to deploy this, and yet it's very ill deployed. Again, I want to deploy more technology-based solutions in order to create better social outcomes. One of TELUS's main thesis, and that's how we've wrapped ourselves into TELUS Health, wrapped ourselves into TELUS Agriculture in order to advance what will improve our societal outcomes. And it's that intersection of the technology, the art of possible, human creation capabilities, and just simple curiosity that is a place where we can find new money because we're creating new value.
So real quick, Cal and Dan, I'm just curious, and maybe rewind 5 years ago, we rolled out 5G, and it was speed, it was gaming, it was augmented reality, it was all these consumer services. Is it enterprise? Is that where we unlock value for 5G? Do you think?
Go ahead, you look at me.
Yeah. It's one of the few that actually has a standalone 5G network. I would say absolutely, 100%. I mean, and you can look at some of the illustrative examples that we've deployed as proof of concept, at least the F1. So in Las Vegas in November, the F1 comes to town. We stand up a unique slice of the network that you can really only do by QoD or prioritization of the network on a standalone 5G network. And you make sure that the number one thing that's prioritized after emergency services on the network is the ability for a POS system to work. You want people that are in this town to spend money. How do you ensure that works? You prioritize the sliding of a credit card and the transfer of the data from that machine up into the cloud to perform the transaction. Another example is, we did a bunch of stuff in Issaquah, up in Sammamish at the LPGA this year, where we are basically using the 5G network as the core layer for broadcasting the services for the event itself. We have a proof of concept in Boston where we put a hospital on a slice. Everybody engaged with the hospital, the ambulances that support the hospital staff, the equipment in the hospital. It's all got its own designated place and time on the network through a slice. Again, these are things that are only, they're pretty clearly enterprise opportunities, and they're only enabled by the fact that there is a network that is this 5G technology that is created now in a standalone manner that allows for these incremental types of services that you don't get in a non-standalone. You don't get in 4G, 3G, 2G, whatever the other technologies are. I don't know about 6G. I'm sure that's going to take us to the next place, but I think everybody needs to catch up on 5G and take advantage of some of these really rich value propositions first. I can go through, example, we do sailboats, real-time sailboat racing. I know it seems a bit exotic, but there is a huge difference from 5 or 6 years ago, the way that the sail teams used to work. They would have to write down all the data, go review it, and then try to implement what they learned the day before in the next day. That is all real time now. Those kinds of interactions are all real time because you can prioritize the transmission of the data on these networks and have zero latency basically, right? So lots of stuff like that.
Yeah, and how T-Mobile and others and TELUS differentiate those services versus your competitors is automating the pricing, automating the packaging of those network slices. So if you are a a medical supplier or doctor's office and you need a slice, how do I order that where it's not I call a wholesale rep, I wait 6 weeks for a quote, they have to run a new line to my.
Whoa. What wholesale rep are you talking about, man?
Of course not you, but
My wholesale guys are in the audience, and they're upset now.
you got great systems, I'm sure. So I guess my point is like the enterprise part of our businesses have sometimes lagged on how they think about technology, how they price and package services, and how they automate the customer experience, because it's been very custom. When we rolled out, wholesale and enterprise pricing, it's typically negotiated. It's one-off. It's sometimes long duration to implement. And I think if you start to automate those things more, you create a better experience for the enterprise customer. And we don't always think about the enterprise customer the same way we think about the consumer.
Well, I think the reason for that is the volume of scale and the customization that often accompanies enterprise. And I think that mindset needs to evolve, and you need to be able to create the interaction point, the digital first mentality for the business ecosystem. You're probably going to have ultra large businesses that will never be be able to do in a digital, but the small mid-market should be largely standardized by, what do you want? Okay, I want this. Okay, my little AI agent goes off, creates it, presents it to you, and you click go. And by 11 o'clock tomorrow, it'll arrive on your porch in a nice box with a smiley face on it. And we need as carriers to be able to convert our traditional long lead time, can't really tell you or guarantee when delivery will occur, into that which is becoming the norm. I go onto Amazon, I buy it, it says it will be there at 11 o'clock. In fact, my buying decision is informed by the delivery and availability.
That's the point. Yeah.
So there's a huge piece of the consumer management component of our business that is ultra important to us and will never change. But will they be affected by 5G as much? Don't know. Jury's out on augmented reality, virtual reality. What use cases will really appeal to a consumer such that they'll pay for it? Question mark in my mind.
Yeah.
Enterprise for sure.
Yeah. By the way, I do think you also, like, the enterprise teams have to think a lot differently about what they're selling in the marketplace. And really, to make that point, like, selling SIMs for people to use, in their phones is not the way it's going to happen going forward. The enterprise teams, and this is a big focus for T-Mobile, and Callie Field, our president of the T-Mobile Business Group, has done this amazing job of changing the way the B2B teams think about what their role is in the enterprise. It's about solutions. It's not about selling SIMs. You have to get people to buy in and understand how to sell the value proposition associated with a full-blown solution. That's how you get to these interesting use cases that require 5G, for example. If you just want to go out and sell SIMs, you're never going to get out of your own way, right? It's about thinking about these things as solutions, which then drives a consultative approach, which then opens the door to, again, go deeper in your relationship with your customers, drive a ton of innovation into how you deliver on the solution, as opposed to just how many phones do you need and how many SIMs can I put in those phones. It's a really different way to think about it. And I think, the network technology creates a utility, and the B2B teams need to now take that utility and convert that into value by way of selling these things as solutions. And, to go all the way back to the beginning, that's something that you need the stack to be able to do for you, right? Whether it's configurability or something in the cloud or on the edge, there's lots of ways to bring that to life, but it is all interconnected in that sense.
I think if you're going to also look at ultimate scale, right, getting all the revenues, not just a little niche over here and another niche over there. The big theme that I've seen, and Cal really kicked it off with his Seeing the Light, is that we're talking about taking network assets, not thinking about the technology, but finding a way to let either servcos within our companies or third parties entirely take that, bundle it with affinity, bundle it with shopping, bundle it with knowledge of F1, bundle it with knowledge of a factory or boat racing, And this, to me, says what we're really looking at is ways to take network as a service and create these digital ecosystems or enable them. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on that. Breaks our model because now the network is being used, the common resource of the network is being used in hundreds of different ways by people who don't know a lot about networks and don't want to. And we need to do that efficiently and make money. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I think you can get there, but you have to pick where you want to allow there to be, because you can't have no guardrails. You've got security issues out there, just like as the simplest. You don't want, somebody using your network for nefarious purposes, so you have to be careful and put some appropriate guardrails around.
We're bringing it down.
Well, yeah, that's a different problem. But so you want to preserve reliability. You want to be, mindful of the deteriorating potential impact on your own network. You don't want to sell network as a service only to have them consume too much network and bring the network down. So there's some of those elements that I think we still are in the early days of figuring out. But I'd actually turn this around. I don't actually want to sell my network as a service, with the exception of certain things, private wireless networks, certain elements where I'm okay doing that. But I only want to do that after I decided where I'm going to, bet we're in Vegas. I'm going to put my money on black or the green, zero bets or whatever. I'm going to place my bets on industry verticals. I'm going to place my bets on certain service offerings. And I'm not selling my network as a service for those because I think I have the better mousetrap. And I want to stake my claim to that space informed by the data that, guess what, comes off my network and create value for my customers. Network as a service for things that I'm okay. You can take this part of it, but I'm keeping this part over here because I put the bet, I invested the risk capital, I want the return.
Do you have some examples of areas that you see a real opportunity for TELUS?
Yeah, I do, but I'm not going to talk about that. Other than to say, broadly speaking, agriculture, farm to fork, we think is a social investment of a paramount priority. We believe that our infrastructure, positioned with the right service offerings in the agriculture space, is a way for us to feed the planet.
Interesting.
We think that's critical. We also think healthcare. Think about the intersection of the technology we've deployed and the ability to deliver outstanding health outcomes. And we learned through COVID that virtualized healthcare actually works. Why do I need to go to a doctor's office, wait in the waiting room? Anybody go to the little waiting room? And you go to from the big waiting room to the little waiting room, wait for the doctor?
That's where I caught my cold.
Yeah, there you go, right? So investing, those are the spaces we think are critical, drive social outcomes that we want to be proud of and we want to make it our legacy contribution.
And don't forget the traffic problem.
Okay, are you ever going to let me forget that now?
Network as a service is actually, I think it's super exciting because it is undefined. I'm not sure if when someone says network as a service up here, we're even all talking about the same thing, right? There's some exercise still that has to be done to define maybe what network as a service is. I think we like to think of it as not your traditional network stuff like talk, text, and data. To use the same word that we all dislike, that's fairly commoditized at this point in time, after 40 years of networks being up and running. It's the levers that you can pull that then change the experience on your network. It changes the experience of how talk, text, and data are ultimately used. So, for us, I think that's an emerging business for us. We are going to lean into that. There are a lot of interesting things that are API driven. So instead of convincing someone to be on my amazing 5G network, which is always great, I want to enable them to have access to the tools that sort of drive a differentiated behavior on my network, right? So I might be able to offer you an API that allows you to create a slice on demand or quality on demand. You can adjust your prioritization level. Silent authentication. Everybody sort of gets tired of multi-factor authentication. Silent authentication. Can I do things to help you know that the phone number that you're working with has been, KYC'd, validated, verified? There's a lot of really cool location-based type services. These are all APIs that I want to expose to developers, to companies that will take these APIs and potentially use them as a core API service, or even better, go build something with it. Like, go create an interesting product out of these APIs that we offer. So when we think about network as a service, there's lots of these kinds of APIs. Some of you may be familiar with Chimera and the GSMA and how they orchestrate a kind of network as a service. There's a lot in there, but at the end of the day, it's going to take us together as operators, network operators, a way to find a way to expose these things to ultimately enhance or create or make much better the experience that a lot of people have today, just based on your traditional, like, I have an unlimited plan, so I can talk and text and surf the interwebs as much as I like.
We brought him up as an example a couple of times, but I'll just use Formula One because it is this customer of Ascendant, and we use this notion of experience-based pricing, right? Like, how does a company like Formula One with a digital service differentiate their subscription versus NBA or NCAA or all the other sporting? And it's about fan experiences. So how do I get a specialized fan experience when I follow a specific driver? Can I sit in the cockpit with that driver through a specialized fan experience? Can I earn points so I can actually go to the F1 race when I'm in? Can I get access to T-Mobile hotspots because I'm a fan who's watched so many events? And so giving that flexibility in the pricing and packaging of your offers, I don't know what services are going to come up with, but the last thing I want to do is be a vendor where T-Mobile or TELUS or whomever comes to me and says, hey, you're an impediment to launching services. Like, that can't exist. So our focus is creating that flexibility and giving brands autonomy to define what network as a service looks like.
I'm thinking that we're coming toward the end of the panel. Would we like to summarize a little bit what we want to do different operationally to realize these opportunities? We've talked about some great opportunities. What in our business processes, what in our mindset, what in our systems is holding us back?
I think...
or nothing, maybe nothing.
You need to figure out what those things are. I mean, right. You do have to, like, I think there are a lot of places where you can understand there's a problem, but you're not really clear on what the problem is. And if you don't know what the problem is, you won't be able to organize around how you solve for it. So I think you do have to get pretty clear on what kind of change it is that you want to affect. And then, you're going to want to organize around that accordingly. Clearly, AI is going to help us do that. I mean, there's just no question, right? Whether it's helping me understand where I may get the biggest bang for the buck when I deploy my network, or helping my customer and their customers understand an invoice, or why coverage didn't work in a certain area, or what's the best suite of services for them given a stated set of needs that they have, right? But kind of identifying where those opportunities are. Usually those are barriers today. They are obstacles, they are pain points. And so you look for those, you identify which ones are the worst, you prioritize how you want to remove those obstacles, and then you go after it. And you go after it by whatever means you have available to you. And I think that also will continue to change, like the things that you have available to you, whether it's the services provided by CSG, whether it's some interesting OpenAI configuration, whether it's blockchain, who knows, right? But those are the things that we have to sort of stay really focused on, because the goal is to remove the obstacles, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, at TELUS, we're largely focusing on the why first. At the business outcome you want to engineer, and then back solve for the what and the how. But you need clarity of purpose in order to achieve that. You got to kill the no factory. Anybody ever been to the no factory? It's the place where really good ideas go to have the list of reasons why you can't do something. Right? And, we're notorious for no factory mentality and thinking because it comes with risk.
Right.
And for some reason, people go to meetings and tell you all the reasons you can't do something. I want to go to the meeting where everybody's there saying how you can do the something. What would have to be true in order for me to achieve this? And so when you ask about mindset change, it's that. Focus on the why, the business outcome you're trying to engineer, and change the thinking away from no factory, and focus on the business problem you're trying to solve for, and engineer it. We've got awesome technology. We got awesome people. Never in the history of mankind have we had the ability to do the things we can do. The future is extremely friendly and quite bright for us, if done well.
Yes.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I think that was well said by both panelists up here. I guess the only thing we kind of touched on it earlier is how do we do these things independent of everything else that's going on in the business? And I think where I've seen success happen and innovation accelerate around some of these new services, whether it's network as a service or others, it's when they're allowed to breathe independent of what else is going on. And maybe it's just don't even go into the no factory, go somewhere else to ask for permission. But I think you kind of got to start there. And some of these new cloud technologies, they're a lot less expensive, and they scale up and scale down real nicely. So if you test a business, you're not investing in, infrastructure that's running on your floor that, costs real capital. Like you can spin up and spin down these environments and save yourself some of the headache on the capital expenditure side.
Well, I want to thank the whole panel. I thought it was very interesting to focus on something that the panel said early and where we wound up at the very end. And early, I think, Hal, you kicked it off and said, we don't make these bad decisions because we're dumb people. We've got really smart people. And everyone said, yeah, we do. And at the end, we said, we need to think differently and maybe not go to the no factory. And I think it's that thinking differently and maybe not measuring future services by our experience with fixed line and monthly consumer services. Maybe your metrics need to change. And that may be a place we really need to start. But again, I want to thank everybody for being very open, bringing really interesting ideas, reinforcing each other, and doing a great job. Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.